make observability sexy again in mobile development?
I like to think or say about myself that I'm on this topic the most, emotionally invested person in our company. So
I see a difference and I go to the Android team and I say, hey, the iOS team is sending this telemetry in this way. How come you're sending it in that? And React Native is a great opportunity to drive those conversations.
The fragmentation between the platforms, types of devices, it's not like a single server somewhere you have full control of.
So guys, tough question time. What is still missing? What is still unsolved in observability in React Native?
Unsolved. Oh man.
I think there's
I don't think it's this tough.
React Universe on Air, your go-to podcast for all things cross-platform.
Hey everyone, this is React Universe on Air podcast by Callstack. I'm Łukasz Chludziński. I'm host of this podcast. And today with me, I have Jonathan Munz from Embrace and Adam Horodyski. Hey, hello guys. How are you?
pretty good. How are you?
Hey.
So I brought you here today to discuss the broad observability topic and then narrower OpenTelemetry topic. So I guess I chose my guests really wisely, because then you introduce yourself and tell us why are you good guests for this episode.
Great. I can start. I'm Jonathan Munz. I'm a senior software developer at Embrace. Working on a couple different things there, including our React Native SDK. And Embrace has been doing observability for a long time and more recently switching over to OpenTelemetry. So we're very much in that space, kind of thinking of that kind of day to day. And that's what I'm hoping to talk about today.
How about you, Adam?
So my name is Adam. Day to day, I work as a React Native expert at Callstack. And I like to think or say about myself that I'm on this topic the most, emotionally invested person in our company. So it just, anytime we have to touch on observability or telemetry with our clients, I just every time feel the urge to step in and make things sort of better. So I guess that's it.
Great. And I'm glad I have you, and I'm glad you said that you are emotionally invested, because hear me out. Observability is not usually that sexy topic for developers. It's really important for products. It's really important for the business part of the product. It's not really that sexy, again, for implementing, right? So, let's try to decipher why is that and why is it as important as we think it is. Starting with the difference between observability and OpenTelemetry. Those are not the same topics. Like Jonathan mentioned, Embrace was doing observability for a long time, and only recently this is like loosely saying this, probably for the past 2-3 years, right?
2 years,
you've invested in OpenTelemetry. So maybe Jonathan, you can start us up with just explaining the observability topic in general.
Yeah, the difference there, observability is kind of the general term. It's what you're trying to get out of whatever framework you're using, whatever tooling you're using. It's the idea that your application out in the wild, people are using it, things are going on, and you want that visibility into what's happening. Are there problems? Are users doing the things I want to do? And OpenTelemetry is really kind of a codification of that. It's a standard that's, okay, given I care about observability and I want to get that insight, how do I do it? And observability in OpenTelemetry is a way to have a sort of standard framework for thinking about all the various bits and pieces and signals that you actually want to collect and what those look like and how you would collect them. So it's sort of a means to that goal of observability.
What would be the signals you said that we use, like examples of signals that we use in observability?
So in OpenTelemetry, trying to keep this sort of general model as simple as possible, those really come down to 3 buckets. So you can kind of think about everything fitting into as either a span, a log, or a metric. And these really come down to, again, what's going on in the application. So a span would represent something happening over time. So, if there's a really expensive operation that you're doing, the span would represent, okay, I started calculating this thing at this time. It took me this long. That was this, and maybe a few things happened while I was calculating that. Maybe a network request went out or something. So that's a span. A log is an event at a moment in time. So, hey, this error happened at this moment in time, or this important thing happened at this moment of time. And metric is really anything you can sort of take a measurement on throughout the lifetime of your application. So, what was the CPU usage at moment X? What was the memory usage? So, signals in really everything you care about, and then OpenTelemetry is trying to bucket that and trying to control some of that complexity by putting it in these three different categories.
So bridging this from development environment to production, we are able as developers to take all of those measurements ourselves, all of those logs ourselves, and verify that on my machine it works and it works well. And then observability is answering the question, what about our user base? Do they have the same experience? Are logs coming in the same order? Or do they have some issues that we are not familiar with in our development environment?
Exactly. And that's where you get into sort of another umbrella term or another buzzword of real user monitoring. And that's exactly that. When there's only so much, it's all important, but there's only so much you can do sort of in the environment you control. You can do a bunch of testing locally. You can have integration tests. You can even have synthetic traffic where you hammer your application with a bunch of simulated calls or simulated traffic. And then you get to this point of, okay, I'm pretty confident, but at some point you have to put your application out in the wild, and that's where real users are going to interact with. And that's where you have way less control. You don't know what kind of devices a user has. You don't know what kind of network connectivity. And that's when you need that observability to understand, okay, worked for me, does it work for these, million other people?
That also connects nicely with the one caveat that I mentioned at the beginning of the episode. So that's how the observability is sexy for the business case. Because we as a business, we want to be data driven, and we want to know where to invest our effort. For example, if on my development machine something is slow, it doesn't mean that all of my user base encounters the same issues. And then again, I can lose something when I only monitor my development machine.
Łukasz, what you mentioned at the very start was that it feels like it is not only sexy on this level of production environments, but it is super usable, or it could be super usable for developers in these environments before that. So if you have a development one, staging one, there's a lot you can get out of signals in these. It just, like the state of the tooling around it for now is, it's super hard. If you're not using some fancy tooling, it's super hard to set it up, I believe, to make use of it in these lower environments. And then one brilliant thing I heard lately, sort of expanding on what Jonathan, you told us about the signals, different types of them. I really like one metaphor that I heard from Ryan Dahl recently on one of the talks for integrating OpenTelemetry into Dino. We all know logs from our systems that we build daily. So a log is like a unit that we pretty much understand. There's a lot of nomenclature behind OpenTelemetry in the standard and around the protocol, but really what these signals could be translated into is, if we know a log, which is point in time sort of type of information, then a trace is a fancy log because it has some causality to it. And spans, you mentioned only spans, they contribute to traces that we can record. And then a trace is pretty much a set of logs that are more fancy. And then metric is something that can be derived from both of these. So if you just get a bunch of your logs, aggregate them, then you can have an average latency on some endpoint, for example, or an average time to render a screen. And this feels more like a business-oriented language now. But it really nicely goes from one to the other.
I guess I could, if I was very naive, I could try to set it up all by myself in my production application. I can first make my developers use it and my testers use it and then contribute to those metrics, those logs. And then I can just ship it to the world and then try to navigate that data. Why I shouldn't be doing that?
I mean, you could. You're going to hit a lot of walls on the way, but technically you could, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to your previous point, why wouldn't a developer think of it as sexy or why does it seem like a chore, right? And I think that's not unique to observability. We're all working on certain problems because we find those are interesting. Every time we're distracted, you're like, oh, now I have to deal with sending out marketing emails for my application, or now I have to deal with, any of these things that distract us from sort of our core interesting problem that we're trying to solve. It's going to be less interesting, and it's time we're taking away from our core competencies. So observability is difficult, and there's a lot of challenges, particularly on the client side. You're in an environment you don't control. There's millions of devices. Some of them are offline. Some of them are really old. There's a lot of problems you're going to have to solve if you want to do this from scratch. And so to make that sort of chore of, hey, I need observability easier, it is really helpful to look to tools, look to things that are being developed by people who spend 100% of their time trying to solve these problems. And yeah, like Adam said, I mean, you can do it yourself. It's just a question of, are you willing to make that same kind of investment and solve all these tricky problems that you're gonna run into?
Yeah, let's talk about those. Let's talk about those like challenging of front-end and mobile, in particular observability. I know from my brief research that observability came from backends, really, from like systems that we have control over from our servers.
Yep.
And those are really easy. Okay, I have not set it up, but this is risky, in my notes. Like, it's much easier to set up an observability on something that you control on your backend, for example, in your servers, than on something that users just hold in their hands. So can you talk briefly about the challenges that we have as mobile developers, React Native developers, or React developers on the web with observability?
Yeah, so I think we'll talk about I can start talking about the back end a little bit, because I think part of the benefit there, or why it's a bit, there are different challenges, but why we think of it as a little more easy or a little more solved. I mean, that is where, as you said, observability has been thought about. It has matured for a lot longer. And so a lot of those problems tend to be, if not easy, at least sort of known quantities. And we have sort of approaches that we understand. And there are some benefits. Like you say, you control the environment. Your backend infrastructure ideally is always online. There's no, this thing, went in a tunnel. Your backend server didn't go in a tunnel for 20 minutes and lose connectivity. It should always be online. And really scale-wise, even if you have large backend infrastructures, you're talking about hundreds or maybe thousands of machines. So when you're talking about mobile devices, you're talking about potentially millions of devices that are all over the world, that are fragmented in terms of their capabilities. And again, something you don't control. So there's sort of technical challenges, and there's also kind of semantic challenges. Like, what does it mean for an interaction on a mobile device? Like, what is a session on a mobile device? You don't really have these questions on the back end. A back end infrastructure handles a request and it does its thing. There's not this human element that you then have to kind of think about what that actually means.
On a backend, it's really easy to see kind of the entirety of the thing. If you hit an endpoint, that's when something starts, right? If you return something out of it, it's already done. So anything in between, it's easy to like give it a grasp look and wrap things in spans and whatnot. And then if you try to translate, that's where the challenge really is. If you try to translate this, the same APIs, for example, into the mobile space, where you all of a sudden have all the front-end frameworks, their different rendering quirks here and there, tens, probably, if not hundreds of libraries per each project, all of the stuff that probably needs to be sort of, I won't be speaking jargon probably, but auto-instrumented. in the background for you, it's really hard to get the whole picture. You would naively probably think of, okay, if I press this button, now I want to start collecting something. And then if I navigate to some screen, I want to like finish up my measurement and then see what's going on in between. On the backend, if you hit an endpoint, you return from it, you can measure this in between. Here you have probably more realistically tens, hundreds of different, let's say, Redux sagas running in between, right? Network requests, all of the different type of traffic that could be running in the background. And you might be really interested in these. It's really more complex. And then what Jonathan mentioned, the fragmentation between the platforms, types of devices, it's not like a single server somewhere you have full control of.
I guess like that is answering the question, what is so challenging about mobile instrumentation, mobile observability, and also that is directing us towards the standards, right? Let me try and make anecdote is a strange word for this, but like some kind of picture for you so that you understand my train of thinking. So on the one hand, as developers, as products, we want the standardization. So I could either create my own framework for observability and call it Callstack framework for observability. I set up my own instrumentation on the upside. I set up my own dashboards and data visualization software on the front end, on like the admin side, right? But that's, like you said, that's cumbersome. That's really easy. I could fall into creating my own framework instead of focusing on my product. So there are a bunch of different solutions out there in the market, like Embrace, like Datadog, like Grafana, that handle either some of those parts of that instrumentalization or like all of it for you through SDKs. So that's like fully fledged solutions that you can try out and implement and just use. And then on the other hand, if I really want to do my own instrumentalization, I don't have to do it from scratch. I don't have to figure out how to do it myself. The standard already exists. So on the other hand, we have the OTL, which is OpenTelemetry. So somewhere in between, there will be tools and libraries that handle either all of it or some of it or none of it, but I can sometimes like mix and match those, right? So like the scope of the observability market, let's say, is pretty broad. So Embrace is on this end of the spectrum where you have all of those things packaged in one nice product, one nice service that you can use. And there are a bunch of others as well that I mentioned. But you are unique in a way that you are still trying and pushing for conforming with the OTL standard. So can you explain maybe why? Why are you pushing that road and not some other proprietary things?
Yeah, and I think that's a great summary. I mean, I think because there is this broad spectrum and there's so many different ways that you may want to collect telemetry, there may be so many sort of end business goals of, what you're trying to get out of any given observability tool. The thing about, and we've talked about OpenTelemetry a fair bit already, the thing about all these different areas is it is really hard to be great at all of them. Where at Embrace, we have built up a lot of domain expertise is observability in the client side. So whether that's React Native or web or native Android and iOS. And we try to collect and do the best job we can of giving you insights in that sort of client-side telemetry. But we recognize that that's only part of the picture. You do have telemetry coming from your backend systems. You have data that's being collected from other tools and other places. So that's where the standard becomes important, because if everyone starts adopting OpenTelemetry or whatever the open standard is, and starts collecting all this telemetry in the same way and talking the same language, you really open things up where you can start exporting data and sending data back and forth to different places. So with Embrace, that's why we really go heavy into OpenTelemetry, because we want us to be the thing that collects your client-side telemetry in the best way possible, but we don't want to lock you into our system. We want to make sure that that data, if you have another team that's looking at Grafana, that's looking at another observability system, you can send the data we collect to that system. So you can look at your client side and you can look at your backend telemetry together, and there's backlinks to Embrace. So, okay, everyone on your team speaking the same language, look at the same dashboard. I need more context. Let me click from this Grafana dashboard back to Embrace. So that's all possible because things are being collected in a standard way and is speaking the same language. So we think that's really the special sauce, that we can do what we do well, but also play nice with the rest of this ecosystem so that data is free to sort of go back and forth.
You're listening to React Universe on Air, your go-to podcast for all things cross-platform with React and React Native.
Adam, I know that you've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and you are, like you said, you are emotional about this subject. So
I don't think it's a wise thing to do.
Maybe I can direct a question to you, because like Jonathan said, we were talking about OpenTelemetry, but maybe not in a very structured way. So let me ask you, what is your 2-minute pitch of what is OpenTelemetry for mobile? Because like that's a new thing. OpenTelemetry had been backend standard, and I know that Embrace contributed to creating this mobile standard for OpenTelemetry. So what it is now and like how it still evolves?
You know what? I don't particularly like to think about it what it is now, but what it could be
aims to be
in the near future. Yeah, what it should aim to be. So right now, I wouldn't say for React Native, for example, it is a standard, because every project I join, I don't see being used everywhere as the golden standard for collecting telemetry, for example. If we were to like limit ourselves to this collection and instrumentation phase, what I wanted it to be is the standard. So the true power, as Jonathan mentioned, it's not in the OpenTelemetry itself, which is, but I think by their quote is a set of APIs, SDKs, and standards, and anything that is within the scope. But in the OTLP, which is the OpenTelemetry protocol. And this is where the true power of it really is, because it is the same language now that you can speak. And then the barrier, for example, really lowers for companies like Embrace, that they could show their product to a whole lot bigger audience now. Because if you were to speak this language in your product, but you're trying to figure out it on yourself with Grafana dashboards, for example, which is not a bad thing to do, but in general, you're trying and you think you're struggling with something. Now, by using the same protocol, you can try better tools for some parts of this job, and maybe you would love them, right? Maybe you get far better insights from these other tools, and that's fine. As long as you stick with this protocol, and this is, I guess, like my biggest pain with it, it's not yet like this widely adopted, and it doesn't have as much exposure as I would love it to have. I wouldn't even try to pitch what it is right now for me in this space, but I'm just focused on where it could be a few, I would say, if not months, years from now, and that's where I sort of aim. So giving it more exposure, and at the same time, I think you're trying to aim for me to mention the library, right? So in the last few months, or I've been misinterpreting this one. Last few months, I've been working on React Native OpenTelemetry, which, by the way, since we started preparing for this, I think it's going to get like a rebrand and be decoupled from React Native, really, or not. I'll see. But what I'm missing is the protocol itself, and the standard behind it is really well, but it is really complex for products and product companies to adopt. So even though it is brilliant, I myself had to spend a nice 2 months to really get a grasp on what is what and what I can use for different tasks. If I were to onboard day one to some other service like Embrace, for example, I would not have to spend this time. But maybe there are companies, and I see this with our clients as well, there are companies which try to stick with owning this part of the code, and that's fine with them. But it's not so easy to onboard them then to OpenTelemetry, because it is getting more and more complex. So what I wanted to play around with was creating this library that lowers the barrier for using this open standard, and then exposing the same APIs and whatnot, but the library could be gone. The protocol that different companies could onboard into is the true value. And then once they're using it, they could try different tools, maybe build it themselves somewhere or not. Depends on them and their needs, really. Wasn't 2 minutes, right?
I think it was.
Okay.
And thanks for the great explanation. And thanks for mentioning the React Native OpenTelemetry. Is that correct? Yep. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So from what you said, I got that OpenTelemetry standard is not a product.
Oh, yeah. It's not.
No company owns OpenTelemetry. Probably there's some kind of consortium.
Yep.
People are still working on it and maintaining the standard. The second thing that I got from your answer is that if I were to use it directly, I can, and it's still going to be a better experience than just like re-implementing the whole standard myself. But it's going to require me to understand a lot of underlying framework dependencies, underlying standard. You might not necessarily want to do that. You just want to onboard your developer to like using observability. So I know that I can use OpenTelemetry directly. So those are like standard native SDKs that I communicate with OpenTelemetry with.
Depends on the platform, but yeah, you could use a Kotlin SDK, Swift SDK, C++ one, and JavaScript one. And what this library, for example, tries to accomplish is coupling this all together for you. So technically, and probably months from now, I could imagine this being like a nice wrapper on top of these SDKs. So you wouldn't have to worry if it's a C++ SDK underneath that is more performant for you, but you'll be using the same APIs on the JavaScript, for example. If you were to stick with the raw SDKs that OpenTelemetry provides, you can use separate SDKs on each and every platform and you'll be good to go, technically. Technically, because it requires a lot of work.
Yeah, and like follow up to this, is this library, the React Native OpenTelemetry, bridging the SDKs to JS layer only, or are you also building some kind of structure, some kind of patterns around those so that would be easier to use?
No, I wouldn't think it's mature enough to even say it. So it's at the stage where I'm just experimenting with with the technical details, really, which doesn't really matter. But the thing that is exposed to once it gets well sorted in the background, the thing that is exposed to you is a set of features. So technically, with OpenTelemetry, you have all the tools required to set up session tracking, to tag different things in your system well. But this is, once again, just complex and requires a lot of work with the documentation. And if you were to, with this library, onboard yourself to, okay, now I have this, I record some traces from users, but I also want to be able to see into a very specific session. If you want to onboard yourself into session tracking, you just toggle the session flag on and maybe provide a function, which is a get session, and then you will be good to go. All of the plugin system that should work underneath and under the hood should be sorted for you, so you wouldn't have to spend this time trying to figure out the plugins and what else could be in the protocol. So it just tries to lower the barrier, but you could do the same manually by yourself. I'm not even saying it lowers the amount of code you'd produce. I wouldn't risk it, but it definitely lowers like this cognitive load that is required for you to onboard yourself. So the standard is there, and technically all the products on the market could be using it, but at the same time it requires, as I said, like months to just figure out, okay, do I need this, do I need that, what sort of things in my platform are already auto-instrumented so I could just use a library. And my goal with, for example, React Native OpenTelemetry is to lower this barrier as low as possible. So we just define yourself, okay, I want to track network traffic as well. I want to keep track of a session. I want to keep track of this, that feature. And technically, you could spend like a month or so in tracking native side of your app. It will be way easier, I believe, with just toggling like a native true flag, and you should be good to go.
Jonathan, does it sound familiar at all? Are you working on similar problems that Adam is on this open source project? Are you working on similar problems at Embrace as well?
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is a good, this is an important point, because I think we've been talking, about OpenTelemetry, more of, the benefit of it providing a standard and it providing, similar rules. But in addition to sort of the semantics and the standards, there are folks working on implementations in different languages and actual, as Adam mentioned, Kotlin packages, Swift packages, JavaScript packages. So that's where the community involvement becomes important, because there is this additional challenge. Once you all agree, okay, open standard is great, this is the protocol we want to use, this is how we want to talk in sort of the same language, you then need to actually implement this in code on all these different platforms. And that's where React Native is in a very interesting place, and where there isn't that same level of community engagement for React Native as there are potentially for other platforms. So JavaScript's a good example, where there is a whole sort of group working on OpenTelemetry JavaScript, but in the same sort of, trend of maturity we talked about, that would have started as being built for Node environments and server-side JavaScript. And then browser support would have come next, and that's gaining traction. There was recently a special interest group formed specifically for these JavaScript packages working well in browser environments. React Native is sort of at the end of that train. It can leverage all this code that's been written for Swift, that's been written for iOS, Android, and JavaScript, but it's not been the primary focus or the direct thing that those developers in the community has been thinking about. So all these challenges are very familiar, because, if you come to React Native and you want to gain those same benefits, it's like the pieces exist, but there hasn't been sort of a concerted effort amongst developers to, okay, what does this mean for React Native? Can I just take this JavaScript package, or is it making a bunch of assumptions that might be true in Node that aren't true in React Native? And how do I, make that easier for a developer to come in and just solve that problem for them, rather than them having to figure out all these sort of nuances? And so I think we're kind of at that stage with React Native where we're all kind of figuring that out, and sort of the next drive is getting that sort of community focus and realizing that, oh, this is a platform a lot of people care about, so let's get some of that common tooling figured out, and then we can leverage each other's work and then, build forward. That's how it kind of works in these other platforms, that you get these nice auto instrumentations because folks can leverage sort of an existing pool of these community developed tools, and then say, oh, now for framework X, I want to add some nice auto instrumentation, I want to collect some telemetry for that. I can start building that, and I can start plugging in these different libraries that the community has developed, because we're all sort of driving towards making OpenTelemetry collection on that platform easier. So yeah, we're not quite there yet in React Native, and that's where a lot of this work is driving towards. Like, how do we make this simpler? How do we make this, tooling?
I was going to ask, where is that layer of community engagement that you need? From both ends, from really low level end of people just re-implementing this from scratch, on a little bit more higher end, where Adam and his library comes in and gives you this nice abstraction and this nice unification for platforms. And then on the much higher end, we have the fully fledged solution like Embrace. So where is that layer when you need the common interest, the common glue that figures out those best practices, those patterns?
It's a good question. I think, Embrace has been doing this a fair bit on the sort of the native Android and iOS sides. And I think it's a mix, because any community like OpenTelemetry is large, and there will be a lot of folks talking about the pieces they care about. So at a first stage, it's just being involved in a bunch of different conversations, because you might not know what's relevant. For something like a client-side session, it's important to figure out what that means on your platform, but it's also important to figure out what that means sort of in general for any platform. Like, what does a user session sort of mean in the abstract? And then what are the differences? That might be very different on web and mobile. So then you need to be involved in the conversations with the browser special interest group and the Android special interest groups and sort of come together. So I think the key is, and OpenTelemetry is nice where they have these special interest groups that meet on various cadences on Zoom and talk about problems that are relevant to them. And you'll see similar folks if you go to different meetings. Oh, this same person was in the semantic convention special interest group and they were in the Android special interest groups. And I think that's how you have to kind of go forward, is you need to care about solving the problem for your platform, but also care about solving it sort of at the semantic level. And those things kind of need to come together. And it is messy. Like, I think the way it goes with some of these newer client-side semantic conventions is people are just going to try it. Like, hey, on Android, here's our proposal for how you track a user session. And then another platform is going to see that and say that, oh, that's great, but I need to tweak it slightly for what that means on web.
And then we need Adam on both meetings.
Yes.
So he can say, I need to bridge this to React Native. So I want both implementations to be as close to each other as possible, so that it's easier for React Native implementation to like bridge those two and still have unified experience. You said like this is messy. React Native is messy, right? It's messy in a way that we need to support all of those like underlying platforms. We need to establish common patterns for JavaScript layer, and then we have to somehow work around the differences, and there will be differences. Like with notifications, with like all of those other payments, Android and iOS, they differ, but we still need to provide that unification layer for React Native. Yeah, I forgot my question. I got emotional, Adam.
I was just going to add, that's why I actually think React Native is such a great opportunity to drive those conversations in the community. I found this at Embrace. As we're working on a React Native SDK, those same things pop up because our Embrace React Native SDK is built on top of our Android and iOS SDKs. I see a difference and I go to the Android team and I say, hey, the iOS team is sending this telemetry in this way. How come you're sending it in that? And React Native is a great opportunity to drive those conversations because it is, by its nature, the confluence of these different, ideally, that should be consistent from the beginning, but sometimes you have to force those conversations, and React Native is a great opportunity to force those conversations because you have to actually implement it in a way that's consistent.
We're talking OpenTelemetry and smart tooling, but what does real observability look like in React Native at scale? Too often, monitoring gets split across teams, platforms, and tools. That's when issues slip through and app health suffers. At Callstack, we help teams build unified observability for React Native, so metrics, traces, and logs actually tell the same story. That means connected dashboards, alerts that reflect user experience, and KPIs that guide product decisions, not just firefights. Want a full picture of what's really going on in your app? Book a consultation with us and get clarity. Tough question time. What is still missing? What is still unsolved in observability in React Native?
Unsolved. Oh man. I wouldn't say it's this tough. Yeah, please start.
I think there's this sort of just nuts and bolts sort of technical problems. How can I leverage this JavaScript's OpenTelemetry package that is built to work in a node environment in React Native without having to rewrite all this code? That's one, is how can we kind of share, this wealth of code that's already been written for all these different platforms and kind of make it work in React Native. Another is just, interesting auto instrumentations and telemetry. It's great if you can add a package and your network all your network requests are automatically captured, which is fairly doable today with sort of what exists. But there's a lot more you're using on React Native. You're using different libraries for navigating between screens. You're using Redux, potentially using other state management. The more and more of those platform framework-specific libraries just have telemetry being reported out of the box, the more data you're going to get as a developer from just adding, an SDK that understands OpenTelemetry, and the more you're going to be sold on it. If you do all this work, and add an OpenTelemetry SDK to your React Native app, it's nice to then be rewarded with a wealth of data instead of just, oh, I see one or two logs and that's it.
You mentioned something that I was not aware of just a minute ago. So I'm aware that React Native is this big soup of like different libraries floating around, and you can combine your app with like either Redux or MobX or StateX or whatever, and then you can use another library for navigation, etc., etc. And then I'm aware that observability, like fully fledged observability frameworks, will give me that plugins to some of those libraries that I can collect data from. Is there an effort like that of making a standard way of exposing that data, not from the providers of solutions, but from the bottom up, from library creators to instrument their libraries in such a way?
Yeah, so the nice thing about OpenTelemetry, the way it's sort of approached this problem is that the API is very stable in terms of those signals we talked about before. How do I emit a log? How do I emit a span? How do I record a metric? And the idea is that as a library developer, as someone working on a package, you can make use of those APIs, and by default, they're all just no ops. So I'm a developer of a React Native navigation library. I want to play nice in the observability ecosystem. Every time, I switch screens, I'm going to say I'm going to create a new span. I'm going to create a new log. You can do that as a library developer and nothing happens in your application. These are all no ops. You've just added these hooks where you're emitting this interesting telemetry when something happens in your framework that you think would be relevant for observability. And then adding in the Embrace SDK or, React Native OpenTelemetry SDK, those SDKs then turn those no ops into, hey, I'm actually going to capture that. So you get all that out of the box because the library developer has added in those hooks. So that's kind of the gold standard. In reality, this is again where you sort of need that drive and that momentum from the community. Doesn't happen super often with, that's
Can
where...
you give us an example of a library that is instrumented in such a way?
That's a good question. I don't know if I can think of any on React Native specifically.
No, just like whatever works in like JS web ecosystem or whatever.
You could think of Dino, for example, which got auto-instrumented, right?
I believe so. Yeah. Do you know specifically sort of what pieces they have added that for?
I don't think I remember the talk really by Ryan, but I'm trying to remind myself if it was on the internals really. I think so. That was on some internals of it. Yeah. The funny thing is we have to think about it, so it's not good enough, right?
It's not that common, right? So yeah. I know that there is something familiar in Redux, for example. I remembered turning on, or maybe this is like external library that provides Redux with this possibility, but on each action, it would print out the previous state, the action, and then the next state to your output, to your console log. And then I turned this on in one of the projects that I worked with a few years ago, and I forgot to switch it off for production. So our app started to be really slow, and then client noticed that after a few weeks, and he said, oh, we need to fix that. The app is slow. So I looked into the problem, I fixed it, and I got praises for fixing my own errors.
A hero. What a hero.
Yeah, I think I agree. It's that's sort of evidence that it's not that common. I think so. That is the gold standard. Someone hooking into the OpenTelemetry API, just admitting this. But I think a close second is just when you're developing these libraries, thinking about having those lifecycle hooks. And then, for Embrace's React Native SDK, we had auto instrumentations for various navigation libraries like Expo Router and things like that. And that wasn't too difficult because there's clear sort of things you can hook into those libraries. Like, hey, I started a new route. Hey, I ended this new route. So then that's that one extra step for that instrumentation to then, okay, emit a span when this happens, emit a log when this happens. So that's helpful too. And that comes down to sort of an observability mindset. If you're developing a library like this, where would someone care to be notified that something interesting has happened, even if they're not necessarily using the OpenTelemetry APIs directly? Those hooks then allow someone to create an instrumentation like that. And then if you have an SDK which is playing nice with the ecosystem, you can pull in those instrumentations, even if, Embrace can't write every instrumentation, but it can accept an instrumentation that you've pulled in for somewhere else that follows the OpenTelemetry standard and just plug into that SDK. And now you have that extra information without Embrace having to have written it, without you having to have written it, just leveraging that exists out there somewhere in the ecosystem.
Which is something that Adam said, right? It would be hard for everyone to just like re-instrument all of that in each product. It would be much easier if we can just say, hey, Embrace that instrument navigation, or React Native OpenTelemetry instrument my navigation or instrument my Redux or whatever.
Yep.
Yeah. Few last topics. I already asked you guys about this, but I'm gonna try one more time. What are we still missing in React Native observability? And like, how are you approaching this? Like, how do you work in those open groups to make that happen? So library instrumentation would be the first thing. It's pretty tough to actually accomplish because there is so many third parties involved with the community libraries, etc. What would be other challenges that you will still face in React Native observability, OpenTelemetry, that we want to solve, and then maybe we'll ask our listeners to help out?
The first thing that comes to mind is once we, let's say, are able to solve making data collection easier, telemetry collection easier, how do I pipe this to some company's product that does really well the other part, which is it's a whole new challenge that comes after collecting a bunch of data, right? How do I present it to myself or to my team or whatever in a way that is understandable? And that is a whole new thing to even tackle. I'm not even thinking about this part of the challenge, even though I sort of have to with the projects I'm working on. But how do I narrow this gap really? So let's say I use like the very raw OpenTelemetry as the case. I have some other instrumentations in place. And then my hope is, as some product company, hey, who's going to accept this data? And then how do we make use out of it? So hopefully, like my hope is I can pay somebody money for getting really great insights based on whatever I have collected already within my product. It is super hard as hell to do it yourself, I would say. So that's one of the things I'm really missing. Maybe the story for getting from, okay, I collected something myself, is compatible with the protocol. Now, how do I make use out of somebody else's products to have great insights? Maybe Jonathan, you could help me with this one.
No, that's exactly where, the benefit of, again, maybe another non-sexy topic, but like this benefit of having good semantic conventions come in. So as an example, there's very well understood semantic conventions for, what a network request looks like. So if you're going to collect information about a network request, send it to an observability tool, they can, as you're saying, build some very nice insights, very, very nice visualizations, very nice analytics around that, because they understand, hey, this is a network request. This is what everything means. This means it was successful. This means it wasn't. That same kind of semantic conventions does not exist for, let's say, what a crash looks like on a mobile device or what a navigation looks like. But once they do, then if you're collecting in a way that follows that, then these observability tools can start building experiences around what those semantics mean and derive richer insights instead of just, hey, this is a span. That might be useful, but it's way more useful to say, hey, this is a span that represents this type of user action in an application. So I'm going to build a tailored experience around that. So that definitely opens up a lot of possibilities for collecting from different sources and then getting those insights from the tool you've actually sent it to. I do think the JavaScript community is a good example of where this special interest group for browsers specifically branched off of that. I think that's missing for React Native. I think, there's a lot of challenges and we could kind of list them off, but what you really need is a group of people who are, as we said, emotionally invested and meeting on a regular basis, thinking about that. And that's where you get a lot of, stuff coming up that you maybe didn't even think about as you're working on it, kind of in isolation.
Adam, I guess you have some more calls to attend after this podcast.
I think that's one thing for myself, like personally, to do. I don't personally attend because I have a bunch of other stuff, but I don't not, at least I didn't so far attend any of these meetings. So that's one of probably my personal to-dos, is to also join this force outside of Callstack and work we do as part of our R&D.
So guys, at the end of the episode, I have a surprise for you. Imagine you have unlimited power, right? And you can, this is your superpower right now, you can direct people that are listening to this episode right now to do one thing after this podcast. And hopefully it is related with observability and OTL and not with like cleaning your house or whatever. So like, what are you directing them to do right now after listening to this episode?
I guess, we've talked a bunch about community. So there is, the OpenTelemetry is under the umbrella of the CNCF, which is the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. They have a Slack. They have a community page on GitHub. Going there and getting involved. I'll also plug Embrace's community Slack, where we also talk about OpenTelemetry quite a bit. I think that's, if anything we talked about is interesting, I think that's a great next step, because you'll find a bunch of other folks in those community Slacks who are also interested and would be happy to answer whatever questions you had.
Maybe one thing that is not really obvious, at least wasn't to me lately, was that we really look into observability as sort of this production thingy that's going on somewhere in some environment. I would love to see more, and I have plenty of, I just have like a 24-hour days, more ideas on how we could leverage the same data collection pipelines. So like libraries, SDKs that are getting better and will with more exposure, how we could leverage this in development environments. So I see a lot of potential in tooling that could be built, development tooling that could be built for developers to make use of the same data collection pipeline for resolving some performance regressions in their products, understanding better what actually is happening without recording fancy like Hermes traces and try to understand them, understanding better their product and how they implement features within their app, how they solve bugs with data collected that is getting collected or should be collected with the OpenTelemetry standard, with OTLP, with this protocol. So as we are trying to bring the protocol more into products and give it more exposure and making it easier to use, now I would love to see more and more ideas in this space on how do we make use of it in the development space. So before it doesn't hit any of the other environments, what could be built potentially in this stage? I think that's more
my request to all of our listeners would be to, if you are not doing observability in your product, start doing it now. Just pitch it to your product owner, pitch it to your stakeholders. You should be doing observability. And like Adam said, it's not only about production, it's also about your dev environment. So before people can contribute to those topics just Jonathan mentioned or Adam mentioned, we should all be just playing around with observability, understanding it more, understanding the benefits more, understanding the implementation better, and then we can contribute to all of that higher level items of what are the patterns that we should be using. If I have not tried a few wrong patterns, I don't really have an opinion what good pattern would look like. So I just figured it out. Make observability sexy again in mobile development. I don't know what the acronym is, but like you can figure it out. Jonathan, do you want to add something?
No, that sounded great. Yeah, I think you're right. That it starts with that sort of mindset of like understanding it's important and thinking about it as you're developing code, like you would unit tests or anything else that we're used to think about as developers.
So that's a wrap. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Adam, for joining me. You are true observability superstars. I couldn't imagine having anyone else but you on this episode. So we talked about OpenTelemetry. How is it different from observability? What's the standard comprises of? What is the spectrum of like really re-implementing the whole observability yourself, then using open standards like OpenTelemetry, then using some kind of add-on on top of that, meaning React Native OpenTelemetry library that allows you to bridge those items to React Native to give you some better abstractions or whatever, and then going fully to the right where you can use a fully fledged solution like solutions for the whole pipeline from Embrace or from other providers as well. You can find all of the documentation that we talked about, all of the materials in the show notes. Guys, where can we find you on the interwebs?
I think Twitter. Twitter would be nice. Yeah.
Okay.
X. I would say X. All right. I should say X.
I think for me, the Embrace community Slack would be a great spot if you have any follow-ups. The Embrace SDKs we talked about, React Native, Web SDK, are both open source and available on GitHub. So checking those out or filing issues there, I'm got my eyes on those pretty much every day as well.
Thanks again. And let us know in the comments if you are using observability at all. If you monitor your users, you should be monitoring your users. Thanks a lot and see you in the next one.